Chapter 4. Click. Joseph's eyes flew open. He grabbed his Schofield and aimed it at the forehead of the man standing over his bedroll. Slicked back hair, brown face, black mustache. Tony, he realized with a flash of anger. Tony snickered and holstered his Colt. Woulda had you, Joseph. Walking into a wanted man's tent, pointing a gun at him? Joseph sat up with a grimace. That's a surefire way to get shot in the face. Come on, he scoffed, spreading his hands wide with his usual sense of self-importance. I'm Tony Vega, fastest gun in the West. Joseph squinted up at him, sunlight spilling into the darkness of the tent. Tony had left it open when he came in. You told Sal that? Tony looked at his boots. That wiped the smirk off his face. Speaking of Sal, he sent me for you. He wants to talk to you. About what? Joseph asked. Tony shrugged. He didn't say. The canvas flapped in an icy breeze, and a shiver ran down Joseph's spine. Tell him I'm on my way. Tony's brow furrowed. He bent over, hands on his knees as his dark eyes studied him. Hey, you don't look so good. You got in a fight, didn't you? Joseph's pulse quickened. He'd hoped the hits he'd taken wouldn't leave much of a mark. Must be bad. One look at him, and Sal would know. Tony straightened and sighed. Sal's been planning this job for months. I know, Joseph muttered, tossing the blanket off his legs and pulling on his black boots, caked with dried mud from the night before. He'd been too tired to clean them when he got back to camp. He's gonna be mad. I know, Joseph growled. Tony shook his head and ducked out of the tent. Joseph raked his fingers through his hair. Every inch of him ached, his head throbbing like he'd gotten roostered. Except he'd gone without a single drop of whiskey. He'd messed up, let his temper get the better of him, and he couldn't take it back. Joseph shoved his hat onto his head, got up and slung his gun belt around his hips, filled the holsters with his pair of Schofields and pulled on his coat over his dark blue shirt. He took a deep breath and stepped out of his tent. The light stung his eyes, and he held up a hand to shield them. All around him, he saw only grass and sky. Nowhere for hostiles to hide. No signs of civilization, but their mist-shrouded campsite. Just the way he liked it. Elliot already had a fire going, the glow glinting off his glasses as he stirred the steaming pot hanging over it. The smell of beans wafted along the breeze, and Joseph's stomach growled. Rick sat by a pot packed with fresh biscuits, crumbs stuck in his beard as he stared into the crackling flames. Pondering some mystery or another, Joseph supposed. Gus still sprawled on his bedroll, snoring away. Scowling and droopy-eyed, Colin went over and kicked him with the toe of his boot. Hey, quit your snoring! Startled awake, Gus rolled over and squinted up at him. Huh? I said quit your snoring, Colin repeated, louder this time. How am I supposed to sleep with you over here sawing logs? Gus sat up, his shaggy blonde hair sticking in all directions and his round face turning red. I ask myself the same thing every night. I don't snore. You're the loudest, Tony chimed in, scooping some beans onto his plate. Must be that big nose of yours. Elliot chuckled as Colin glared at Tony. Joseph smiled and shook his head. Gus, Tony, Elliot, Rick, and Colin, the five of them, had grown up together in Ohio. They'd been their own gang before they joined Sal's, inseparable since they were kids. They bickered like brothers, always teasing and poking fun at one another, just like he and Marcus did. Nieto stood across from Rick, his plate in one hand and a biscuit in the other. As Joseph approached the fire, the Indian met his gaze, his left cheek bruised and swollen. Charlie's jaw dropped at the sight of him, and he nudged Elliot with his elbow. He'd just turned 18, but he remained a boy in Joseph's eyes. Sometimes he still couldn't believe that Charlie was Remy and Donnie Gitchery's kid brother. He had none of Remy's bloodlust or Donnie's violent temper, being instead of a mild and amiable nature. Elliot looked up and whistled in amazement. What happened to you? I ain't seen you so beat up since we got into that scrape with the Norman boys. Made the mistake of going for a drink, Joseph said as he held his hands over the fire. And, Elliot prompted, did you take a fella's girl? Was she a redhead? Rick gave a long, suffering sigh. Elliot's preference for redheads was no secret to any of them. Joseph remembered the girl he'd met at the homestead, Jessie Hance's daughter, her pretty face glowing in lantern light, half hidden in shadow. A fella and his friends didn't take kindly to Nieto setting foot in their saloon, so we taught him a lesson. Did the law get involved? Colin asked around a mouthful of biscuit. No, we got out of there, fast. Elliot dipped the ladle into the pot of beans and scooped some onto a plate for himself. Did you get the drink first? Joseph shook his head. He pulled his hands back from the fire and rested them on his gun belt. Barkeep said they don't serve liquor. Their expressions turned incredulous. What? Gus exclaimed as he joined them. No whiskey? Dry as a bone. Whole state is, according to him. Come on, we all know that ain't true, Rick said. People like to drink, and they'll go on doing it. Nothing Uncle Sam does is going to change that. Joseph was inclined to agree. What are they going to say next? Tony lowered his spoon and gestured around them. We can't breathe the fresh air? Better start a swearing jar, Elliot quipped. They'll be fining us for that soon. Joseph smirked. Tony'd fill it in a day. An hour, Colin added as Charlie and Elliot laughed. Tony cracked a smile. You know, my dad used to beat me for cussing. Here he goes, Joseph thought. Tony never missed a chance to tell a story. He had a knack for it, but Joseph often wondered how many of them were true. One morning when I was getting ready for school, I got real mad at my mama. I cussed at her, and my dad stood up faster than Gus scarfs down a sausage. I'm gonna tan your hide, boy, he said. He pinned me against the wall with one hand, reached for the switch with the other, tore my shirt clean off my back trying to hold on to me. I made a run for it and jumped out the window. He was shaking his fist and screaming, Get back here, Antonio. I said, Come and get me, old man. Tony grinned at the memory, his dark eyes twinkling. I didn't come home for a week. What happened when you did? Charlie asked in his thick Acadian accent. He was sitting right there in his rocker waiting on me. He whooped me so good I walked crooked for another week after. Elliot wheezed, and Rick joined in with his jolly giggling. Their laughter was contagious, and Joseph smiled as he turned to leave. Hey, Joseph, Elliot called. Don't you want some grub? Joseph stopped and cast a reluctant glance over his shoulder. I've got to talk to Sal. Tell him what happened. The laughter around the fire died. They'd all been in his position at one time or another. Good luck, Rick said with a knowing look. Nieto put down his plate and came over to him. I'm going with you. Joseph shook his head. You don't have to do that. You aren't the only one who threw a punch, Nieto reminded him. But I started the fight. If I'd walked away when I should have, it never would have happened. Nieto didn't deserve the blame, but he seemed to have made up his mind. Joseph sighed and motioned for Nieto to follow him. They strode past the bedrolls spread in the grass, past the grazing horses. The air chilled away from the fire. The waking world washed in soft blues, pinks, and purples. 4 figures stood against the rising sun. One of them, so still he could be made of stone. Sal's rust-colored coat stirred in the wind. His hands clasped behind his back as he contemplated the horizon. The others stood apart from him, Marcus and Donnie listening as Remy went on and on about something. Always yapping, Joseph thought, irritated at the mere sight of his stooped shoulders and crooked hat. He would have sent him packing months ago if Sal didn't insist on keeping him around. Remy was a decent shot and he got things done. But I could throw a rock and hit 50 fellas more agreeable. Marcus took his cigarette from his mouth and blew a trail of smoke into the air, his boredom obvious to Joseph. As he approached them, Marcus looked his way, squinting up at him from under his faded brown brim. You look like hell. I feel like hell, Joseph grumbled. Look at ya, Remy chided with mock concern. All black and blue. Him too, Donnie added with a nod at Nieto. He clucked his tongue and shook his head. You can take the savage off the reservation, but he's still a savage. Joseph shot him a warning glare, and Nieto's hands balled into fists, Donnie's hooded green eyes daring him to try something. Spurs clinked toward them, slow steps crunching through the grass. Sal stopped between Marcus and Donnie, regarding the latter with cold disapproval. He was no Indian, but he was half Mexican, and he didn't tolerate such behavior from any member of his gang. Appearances didn't matter to him, only actions, and Joseph admired him for it. And Nieto is one of us, Sal declared. One of mine. Treat him with respect. If you don't, I will not punish him for whatever he might do to you. Donnie's eyes flashed, his narrow chin jutting. Finally, Joseph thought. He'd caught Remy and Donnie giving Nieto a hard time once before, and he suspected they'd been doing it more often than any of them knew. Sal turned his penetrating gaze on him, his eyes burning like coals. Joseph's satisfaction evaporated. He was a full-grown man of 28, but that one withering look shrank him to a boy again. Desperate not to disappoint, to prove himself a worthy son. Sal wasn't his father, but he was the closest thing he had. I told you not to draw attention to yourself, rumbled Sal, low and foreboding like approaching thunder. Joseph swallowed. He'd lain awake, coming up with 100 ways to explain what had happened. None of them sounded good. We went for a drink, that's all. I didn't think any harm would come of it. You didn't think, Sal echoed grimly. That much is clear. His words stung like the smoke from Marcus's neglected cigarette. Joseph clenched his aching jaw and hung his head, avoiding the brothers' smirking faces. The fault is mine, Agneto said, and Joseph glanced up in surprise. I knew my presence might cause trouble, but I went anyway. A man attacked me in the saloon, and Joseph came to my defense. Sal considered him a moment. His gaze met Joseph's again, and he sighed. Your loyalty is commendable, Joseph, but your actions wouldn't have been necessary if you hadn't gone there in the first place. If you hadn't taken Agneto with you, your recklessness could have brought the law down on us. Guilt weighed on Joseph's chest, dragging his heart down to his toes. I'm sorry, Sal. It won't happen again. See that it doesn't, he warned. You know better. I raised you to be better. The group gathered around. The fire had gone silent, their stares boring into Joseph's back. His face burned. Did you talk to Howard Roach? Sal asked. Yeah, Homesteader hasn't been making his payments. Roach wants me to motivate him. Sal nodded. Roach has proven useful in the past. I want his request taken care of. Joseph shifted uneasily. He was in no position to ask for a day off, but he had to try. I took a hell of a beating, Sal. I don't think I'll be very intimidating, looking like I'm not asking, Joseph. His excuse died on his lips. Sal's stern gaze left no room for debate, no way out. Much as Joseph hated what he had to do, he couldn't refuse a direct order, couldn't fail him again. His ride to the Hance's homestead should have taken an hour, but Joseph walked his horse when he could have galloped, dragging out every minute, drowning in self-loathing, dreading the way the girl would look at him when she learned that he was no good Samaritan. He liked her. He liked her family. They seemed like decent, hard-working people. How could he beat a man whose beeves he'd saved the night before? He could say he'd done it, say he'd threatened him when he didn't. Joseph shook his head, dismissing the idea the second it crossed his mind. Despite their dishonest way of life, he never lied to his friends, and he never lied to Sal. Partly because he didn't want to, partly because there was no point in trying to trick him. He'd tried once, a long time ago, and it had made him so miserable, so racked with guilt, that he couldn't look Sal in the eye. He'd confessed a day later, only for Sal to tell him he already knew the truth. A pheasant launched out of the grass some 50 yards ahead. Steele stopped in his tracks. A rifle cracked, and the bird dropped. Easy, boy, Joseph said as the stallion danced and tossed his head. A lithe figure strode through the waist-high grass with a rifle slung over her shoulder. Her fiery curls whipped across her face like flickering flames. She walked with purpose, carried herself with dignity and pride. His chest clenched. Dinah? She picked up the bird by its neck and examined it. Curiosity sparked in him. A rancher and a hunter. No, he couldn't let her spot him. He had to see this through. Joseph nudged Steele's sides with his spurs and trotted down the slope, giving Dinah a wide berth as he rode north toward the homestead. Now that her back was toward him, he hoped to slip by unnoticed. A shrill whistle split the chilly air as he started up the next hill. Joseph swore and reined in the Mustang. Dinah's red horse appeared over the rise, loping toward her, until he saw Steele. Cardinal, she cried as he changed course. Approaching Steele without fear, Cardinal walked right up to him and they bumped noses. Joseph huffed in frustration. He should slap that horse on his hindquarters and strand her out here while he dealt with her father. Go on. He waved a gloved hand at Cardinal's head, and he shied away. Joseph's insides twisted in knots as Dinah came toward them. I can't do it. Not now. He wheeled the stallion east and spurred him into a gallop. Hey, she called after him. He ignored her, cursing his conscience and urging Steele on. The rushing wind muffled her voice and caught the tails of his coat. The sun glared in his eyes as it rose above billowing clouds. Before him lay a stretch of open land dotted with shrubs and the occasional tree. Hey, stop! Joseph glanced over his shoulder, and surprise jolted through him. Dinah had jumped onto Cardinal's back and was gaining fast. He clenched his jaw and smacked the Mustang's silver hide with the reins. Steele sprang forward with a burst of speed. He pinned his ears flat against his head, his neck stretching and long legs reaching. Cardinal's hooves thundered louder. Joseph looked back and his temper flared. In the 8 years that he'd had him, there'd never been a horse that could outrun Steele. No lawman's mount, not even Tony's fancy thoroughbred. "Go home!" he shouted at Dinah as Cardinal's nose drew even with Steele's flank. "Stop running!" she hollered back. Her eyes blazed in silent challenge, and he realized that somewhere along the way, this little chase of hers had become a race. The nerve of this girl. Didn't she know when to give up? A big dogwood tree bloomed at the top of a hill a couple 100 yards ahead, its dark branches and white flowers standing against the deep blue sky. That'll be the finish line, Joseph decided. Cardinal's nose moved to Steele's shoulder, and before he knew it, they were matching each other stride for stride. Sweat darkened the horses' necks, stems snapping as they trampled the grass. Dinah gripped the reins with both hands, her face screwed up in determination. "Come on, boy," Joseph urged with another tap of his spurs, and Steele surged into the lead. Despite Dinah's cries of encouragement, Cardinal kept falling behind. Wore himself out catching up. Steele charged to the top of the hill, and triumph swelled in Joseph as he galloped under the dogwood's drooping lower limbs. "That a boy!" He reined in the Mustang and circled back to Dinah. She'd stopped Cardinal in the shade of the tree, his nostrils flaring as she leaned down and patted his lathered neck. She spoke kindly to him, but the disappointment on her face was plain as day. She glared at Joseph as he approached her. "Don't look so smug. You had a head start." "You're the one who wanted to race," he said as she slid down from her saddle. Its faded brown leather was stained and frayed, coming apart at the seams. "I wanted to talk to you," she corrected, "but you ran away. That stung." He sat up straighter. "I wasn't running." "Oh, please," Dinah scoffed, rolling her eyes and putting a hand on her hip. "You turned tail faster than this poor fella." She gestured at the dead bird stuffed in a sack on her back. The blow to his pride riled him. "She's got no idea who she's talking to." Joseph dismounted, his spurs jingling when his boots hit the ground. "I've got some business to take care of." "What kind of business?" "The important kind." She arched a thin brow and pointed her thumb over her shoulder. "Salina's that way." "I wasn't going to Salina." Dinah cocked her head as she studied him. "What happened to your face?" "You know it ain't polite to pry," Joseph warned, sauntering toward her. "Your daddy never teach you no manners?" She raised her chin and drew herself up to her full height, standing a good bit taller than most women he'd met. "Your mama never tell you not to lie to a lady?" "My mama was the biggest liar of 'em all." The admission slipped out before he could stop it. Dinah blinked, the stern line of her mouth curving into a frown. She looked young, maybe 20, but a wisdom beyond her years sharpened her gaze. "What does she see?" Dinah sighed and put her hands on her hips. "I guess your trouble ain't my business, so long as you haven't brought any with you." Joseph recognized the weariness in her voice. She'd seen enough trouble in her life. Here she was, hunting alone out in the cold so she could put food on the table for her family. He couldn't beat her father in front of her. She didn't deserve that. "I don't tell tales, especially not to a lady," Joseph said. "But some things ain't for sharing with strangers." He didn't want her to think badly of him, to suspect what he really was. He liked being the good guy for a change. "Well, we don't have to be strangers," Dinah ventured. "Your horse could use a rest. Why don't you come and sit a minute before you get back to whatever it is you were doing?" Joseph glanced at the hills to the north. "You ain't worried about someone seeing us?" She shook her head. "No one's gonna see us. No one comes out here but me and my father." She went to the tree, lifted the strap over her head, and set the sack in the grass. He didn't know what to make of her. She didn't dress or act like the proper women he sometimes saw from a distance, but neither did she strike him as the promiscuous kind common in his world. Whatever she was, she intrigued him. "Don't," the rational part of him warned. He had a job to do, a responsibility to Sal. Never had he shirked that responsibility. But as Dinah took a seat under the tree, Joseph found himself letting go of Steele's reins and leaving him to graze. He walked over to her and hesitated. She gazed out at the boundless prairie, legs crossed and hands clasped in her lap. Pink lips and long lashes softened the sharp angles of her face. Auburn waves tumbled down the back of her dark blue jacket. A floral patterned shirt buttoned up to her neck. Dinah peeked up at him, and he looked away. "Stop gawking and say something, you moron. Looks like a nice catch you got there." "Should make a fine meal," she agreed. Joseph sat beside her, leaving some space between them. "You like hunting?" Her eyes brightened and she nodded. "My father taught me. My brother and I used to take Ginger with us and spend hours out here. Sometimes we'd catch 4 or 5 roosters in one trip." "Ginger?" Dinah's smile faded. "Our dog. She died a few years back. Bird hunting's a lot harder without her, and my brother. Something happened to him? He asked. She frowned and looked down. Her chin jutted as she picked at the grass. He left, decided he was too high and mighty for Kansas, and moved to New York. It's just the three of us now. Joseph grimaced. He'd run across some fellas from the big cities back east, all of them sapheads and tenderfoots. No husband? Realizing how that sounded, he cringed, feeling as if he'd shoved one of his boots into his mouth. Dinah raised her head, and he stared at the horizon, avoiding her gaze. No, she answered with an edge in her voice. He touched a nerve. Better change the subject. And you, she prompted, do you have a family? Yeah, I mean, not a wife and kids, but I've got folks I care about, that I'd die for. He shouldn't be doing this, pretending to be normal, pretending he wasn't an outlaw with a $5,000 price on his head. Joseph stood with an anxious knot in his chest. I should get going. Her face fell. I didn't mean to. You didn't do nothing wrong, he assured her. It's just, like I said, I've got something to take care of. He went to steal and bent to pick up the reins, his heart pounding at the thought of facing Sal. I'll tell him everything, explain what happened with the cows and the storm. Maybe he'll understand. He doubted it, but whatever the consequences were, he'd deal with them. Joseph glanced over his shoulder. Dinah had gotten to her feet and followed him a few steps. He turned to her, wishing he could stay a while longer, that he could get to know her. This was real nice. She smiled faintly, and he climbed into the saddle. Don't be a stranger, she said, sounding like she never expected to see him again. Joseph made no empty promises, gave her no false hope. Strangers was all they would ever be. This spirited young woman had her whole life ahead of her, and he was a dead man walking. Long shadows moved across the plains, the minutes dragging by. Steel pawed the ground, and Joseph shifted in the saddle, waiting with Marcus, Sal, and Remy. Rick and Colin had stayed behind to guard the camp while the rest of the gang made the 16-mile journey east to Abilene. They'd split up into 4 groups when they arrived, each riding into town half an hour after the last. Gus and Tony had gone first to get drinks at a saloon on Cedar Street. Elliot and Donnie went to a restaurant on Spruce Street. Then Charlie and Agneto had set out to spark the diversion that would clear Sal's path to the bank. Joseph leaned forward to look past Marcus. Sal sat silent on his albino stallion, studying his map of Abilene. He always got quiet before a robbery, especially the big ones. But it was more than that. Sal hadn't said much to him since yesterday, since he'd returned without confronting Jesse Hance, and confessed why he couldn't. Sal's plan occupied him for now, but Joseph knew he wouldn't forget. He didn't let things go so easily. Half a mile distant, the rising sun hung low over Abilene's hazy shadow. Joseph hadn't seen the once infamous cowtown since they'd passed through on their way to Salina in 1873, 10 years ago. He hadn't been much more than a kid then, 18 and still so naive. He tried to take a deep breath, but the weight pressing on his chest made it difficult. Joseph, he met Marcus's dark eyes. You got your head on straight? Insulted by the question, Joseph leaned over and spat on the ground between their horses. Marcus's brow furrowed with lingering doubt, but he nodded and turned his gaze back to Abilene. They have no idea what they in for today, Remy said with a yellow-toothed grin. We ain't here to kill folk, Joseph growled. We get the money and get out. Remy bent over his Palouse's white-spotted neck to meet his glaring gaze. Where's the fun in that, Gray? Joseph's grip on the reins tightened, his gloves scraping his sore knuckles. Sal tucked his map inside his coat and pulled out his gold pocket watch. It's time. They thundered toward Abilene with Sal leading the way, galloping alongside the railroad tracks. Joseph's heart hammered as brick and frame buildings rushed toward him, blurring into shapeless streaks of color. The bridge, the water flowing beneath, they reminded him of Salina. Riding in from the west, they slowed their horses to a trot to attract less attention, their coats buttoned to hide the guns on their hips. A blonde woman sat in a rocking chair on her front porch, humming as she sewed. When she heard them coming, she glanced up and froze. Morning, ma'am, Marcus called. Good morning, she answered with a cautious smile as they passed by. Workers sawed and stacked planks in the lumberyard on their right. On their left, some boys played a game of baseball. Suddenly, one of them dropped his bat and pointed at the sky. Fire! There's a fire! Joseph looked up and saw smoke on the other side of the tracks. That's the signal. Steady, Sal muttered. Joseph barely heard him over the thumping in his ears and the clamor of voices ahead. At the next corner, People gathered on the sidewalks and crowded the muddy road, gaping at the gray cloud rising into the sky. Sal nodded and Joseph followed his gaze. Standing outside the saloon, Gus and Tony nodded back. As they rode onto Broadway Avenue, Joseph's face got clammy, his nerves making him sick to his stomach. It didn't matter how many times he'd done it, how many fights they'd survived, or how much Sal had prepared. Every job could go wrong. They stopped their horses in front of the grocery store across from the bank. Joseph dismounted and looped Steele's reins over the rail, unbuttoned his coat and rotated his shoulders, flexed his fingers. "Bandana's on, boys," said Sal. Joseph covered his face and looked up at the bank as they squelched through the half-dried mud. Inside, a vault full of money waited to be emptied. A good take could set them up for months, maybe longer. Maybe this one could be the last. Marcus tossed him a pair of empty saddlebags, and Joseph slung them over his shoulder as he climbed the steps. They gathered around the door. Sal drew his ivory-handled Colt, raised a gloved finger, and began a silent count. 1, 2, 3. Marcus barged into the bank, and Joseph charged in behind him. "Put your hands where I can see 'em and get on your knees," Marcus barked. "This is a robbery." Joseph counted 5 men, 4 workers and a customer. The customer fell to his knees in front of him and raised his hands in surrender. Sal walked in with Remy close on his heels. Remy shut the door and Marcus whipped a bookkeeper upside the head with the butt of his gun. While the man was down and stunned, Marcus snatched a key from his belt. "Here," he grunted, tossing it to Sal. The other bookkeeper scrambled backward and tripped over his desk in his efforts to escape from Remy. He slumped against the yellow wall, scattered papers fluttering around his head. As Sal went to the teller's door, Joseph shoved his revolver in the cowering customer's face. His eyes widened behind round glasses, his lip quivering under a brown mustache. "Give me everything you got," Joseph growled. "Money, valuables." The man frantically fumbled in his pockets. "Now!" Okay, here," he stammered, throwing a few bills and his watch onto the floor. Joseph holstered his weapon just long enough to scoop them into a saddlebag. Sal pushed open the teller's door. It clanged against the wall as he strode toward the 2 men hiding behind the barred windows. "Which one of you is the teller?" he asked, calm and collected. "I am," answered the man in a light blue suit. "Open the vault," Sal ordered. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't do that." Sal aimed his Colt at the cashier's head and pulled the trigger. Joseph flinched, ears ringing as the acrid stench of gun smoke filled the room. The cashier staggered back and hit the glass, smearing a trail of blood and brains as he slid to the floor. Joseph's stomach churned. "Someone's going to hear that," Marcus exclaimed. "Don't matter," Remy pointed at the window. "Law's already underway." Joseph turned and looked out the window. 3 lawmen spurred their galloping horses toward the bank. Getting out would be messy, just like Salina. "Next time it's you," Sal warned the teller. The customer blubbered, and the man kneeling in front of Marcus murmured a desperate prayer. "Open it, for heaven's sake," begged the other bookkeeper. Gunfire erupted outside, men shouting and hooves thundering. Glass shattered and Joseph swore, dragging his hostage with him. He threw him into the corner and took up position next to the broken window. He pressed his back to the wall, heart slamming against his ribs. Joseph glanced at the man huddled in the corner, hair disheveled and glasses askew, scared out of his wits and probably wondering if he'd make it home to his family. "We weren't supposed to kill nobody." Sweat glistened on the teller's blood-speckled face. His mouth opened and closed, mustache twitching as he swallowed. Sal leveled the Colt at his head. Joseph stared, holding his breath. "All right," the teller said. "I'll do it." The door burst open and banged against the patterned wallpaper as Elliot ran into the bank. "We gotta go," he panted. "The whole town's shooting at us." Bullets ripped into his back. He fell face down in the doorway, his brown vest filled with holes. Marcus cursed and Joseph holstered his Schofield. He hurried to his friend, grabbed his arms, and hauled him out of the line of fire. "Hang on, partner. I got you." He rolled Elliot over, pulled down his bandana, and discovered a wide grin on his face. They'd always thought it strange how the worse he got hurt, the harder he laughed. But this time, the tears welling behind his broken glasses betrayed him. "I've been shot, ain't I?" Joseph didn't know what to say. He couldn't even think. Gunshots popped outside. The vault stood open, Marcus and Remy rushing in to get the money. "It don't look good," Joseph admitted. Tears slid down Elliot's paling cheeks. He clutched Joseph's sleeve with one hand and his blood-stained glove with the other. "I can't go yet. I ain't done right by my wife. My kids. He coughed, blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. A lump stuck in Joseph's throat as he gripped Elliot's hand. You've been a good friend to me, to all of us. Elliot's eyes met his, glazing over as he croaked. Don't wait, Joseph. Don't wait. His hand went limp. Joseph breathed a shuddering sigh and closed Elliot's eyes. Remy ran past him with stuffed saddlebags and didn't give Elliot a backward glance. We gotta leave him, Joseph, Marcus said. Joseph looked up at him, then back down at Elliot. Gathering his wits about him, he let go of his hand and got to his feet. As they headed for the door, Marcus called over his shoulder. Come on, Mr. V. Joseph drew his right revolver and followed him out into the smoky haze. Shouts and screams bombarded him from every direction. Off to his left, from the back of his liver chestnut, Donnie shot at anything that moved. As Remy raced towards his horse, a local stepped out of the barber shop next to the grocery store with a shotgun raised to his shoulder. Remy stopped and blasted a hole in his chest. The stranger staggered forward and tumbled down the stairs, dead before he hit the ground. Another dead man lay in the middle of the street. Were there others? Had anyone died in the fire? Don't think about it, just keep moving. Joseph ran to Steele and slung the saddlebags over his back. He unwrapped the reins from the hitching rail, shoved his foot into the stirrup, and sprang into the saddle. Steele tossed his head and snorted, his gray neck already dark with sweat. Easy, boy, Joseph said, gripping the reins in his left hand and his Schofield in the other. Where's Sal? Marcus yelled. A shot went off inside the bank, and they exchanged an anxious glance. Marcus spurred his black Morgan forward, bringing along Sal's white stallion. Joseph galloped after him, and they skidded to a halt in front of the bank. Sal strode through the open door, his face and coat spattered with blood. Joseph's stomach turned. He didn't have to ask what he'd done. He knew Sal had killed the teller for slowing them down. Sal came over and swung onto Hato's back with graceful ease. How could he shoot two unarmed men and look so aloof, so guiltless? Donnie reined in his horse nearby, wild-eyed and breathing hard. Anyone seen Charlie? No sooner had he said it than the kid sped toward them with a lawman hot on his heels. Behind the lawman were Tony on his brown thoroughbred and Gus on his Belgian draft. Joseph lined up a shot, but Tony fired first. He put a bullet in the lawman's back, and he fell face first into the mud. Whew! Charlie exclaimed as his horse skidded to a halt. That was a close one. You're bleeding, Charlie, Donnie told him, and Joseph's eyes darted to Charlie's right shoulder. His blue shirt was soaked through. Make sure he stays on his horse, Sal instructed. We'll tend to him when Abilene is behind us. Following his lead, they turned onto North 2nd Street and galloped alongside the railroad tracks. As the flames roared higher on the south side of town, riderless horses stampeded through the streets. You got the money? Gus called from the back of the group. Lots of it, Marcus yelled over his shoulder. Joseph glanced back, and his heart pumped faster. We're being followed! Remy twisted around in his saddle and fired at the two lawmen on their tail. Watch it, Gus hollered. You almost shot off my good ear. Anger coiled in Joseph's gut. They're not taking nobody else. When they reached the next junction, he steered his horse into the alleyway behind the Opera House. Bricks and windows flew past on his left, and for several seconds, he couldn't see his friends or the lawman as gunshots popped on the other side. Every breath he breathed, every thud of Steele's hooves seemed louder, slower. Finally, Joseph found an opening. He turned Steele on his haunches, slipped between a livery and another frame building, and came out in a perfect position to ambush the lawman. Joseph took the reins in his teeth and drew his other six-shooter. He closed his right eye and squinted down the sights. He couldn't miss. If he did, he risked hitting a friend instead. He breathed in, then out. On the exhale, he pulled the trigger. Bang! The lawman slumped over and tumbled from the saddle. Joseph shut his left eye and aimed his right revolver. Fired again. The other lawman slid off, and his spooked horse dragged him away with his boot stuck in the stirrup. They'd never seen it coming, both taking a bullet between their shoulder blades. The gang whooped and hollered. Did I kill him? Joseph wondered as clouds of remorse gathered. Guilt's shadow loomed on the horizon as he left the burning town behind, his rage scorching like lightning. Elliot's gone. He rejoined the rest of the gang, and they kept up a blistering pace for another mile before giving their mounts a brief rest. As he sat catching his breath, Joseph's gaze swept over the group. When his count stopped at 7, his heart dropped like a hanged man. Where's Anieto? I don't know, Charlie stammered, his hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. After we started to fire, we got split up. Joseph turned steel toward Abilene and squinted at the smoke in the sky. We gotta go back for him. You crazy? Remy exclaimed. They'd lynch us all. Wait, where's Elliot? Gus asked. Joseph swallowed. He couldn't bring himself to tell him. Marcus's jaw clenched, his face taut and stoic, but Joseph knew he shared his grief. He didn't make it, Sal answered gravely. What do you mean he didn't make it? Tony demanded. He got shot, Marcus said, his somber gaze fixed on the ground. Weren't nothing we could do. Tony's dark eyes widened and Gus's mouth hung open, both looking as if something had broken inside them. We have to keep moving, Sal reminded them. We need a place to lay low, somewhere close, somewhere the law won't think to look. No one offered any suggestions. As Joseph racked his brain for ideas, only one came to mind. Joseph, what about the homestead you visited? Sal asked him. No, not there. He couldn't bring Dinah the trouble she'd suspected him of. It's out of the way, he admitted, but I don't think. Take us there.